Um, okay. And I just put in the chat if you could offer up your affiliation, whether it's to the Relevancy and History Project or something else, that would be great. It's always nice to know where people are coming from. And I'm going to give a bit of an overview of what we've been working on in terms of the Relevancy and History Project partnership between the University of California at Riverside and the California Citrus State Historic Park. And I'm really happy that Enrique and Jose are here, who are the wonderful folks who basically make the place run. Whereas I typically sit comfortably from afar, either in my classroom or virtually through the digital work that we've been doing. So it's been a very fruitful set of relationship building projects, and then to actually be able to start to see some impacts has been a really enriching experience. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the iterative nature of the project. And I say it iterative in terms of the iterative nature, because one of the things that we've been doing at UCR in association with Cal Citrus is to almost spread wings to be able to engage the community, which were among the original purposes or aims or goals of the project, but then to see the ways in which we could use that as building blocks, so that rather than sort of swooping in, dropping down for 10 weeks of a quarter, and then flying away, we would come in and try to figure out ways to have ongoing relationships that are sustainable. And sometimes that means it doesn't look exactly the way you might have intended it to look in the beginning. And it also means that there is a great deal of investment by the faculty and staff at the park. And so I want to just say that up front, that it really has taken moving this from a project that's about a class to moving it to something that hopefully one day I might get credit from my university for working on, because the only way it can be sustainable in terms of building reciprocal relationships and non-extractive relationships with community members is for it to keep going and for us to all keep showing up. And so that's why I'm going to address this as an iterative process that has resulted in a number of projects that, again, are building on relevancy and history in different ways that both include and broaden the scope of the project. And so I'm going to share my screen, and there are a few places where I'm going to switch to a website. Normally, I don't trust that is working. So you're just going to have to bear with me, because sometimes it doesn't work. So the first thing is to just sort of start with a PowerPoint that goes through some of the elements of the project. So here I go. Can I get a couple of nods if you're looking at Relevancy and History Project logo? Okay, great. Thank you. Appreciate that. So as Blythe mentioned, the project really started in, oh my gosh, maybe even before 2016, but that's what I have written down in my calendar as when we started talking between University of California, San Bernardino, Jim Newland, Sean Woods, and other people at the state level who were part of a transformation team. And so the public history programs of the two UCs with programs that have been in place for a while came together with Jim and the transformation team to try and brainstorm the ways in which we can involve the universities as a mechanism for really addressing the most contemporary historiography, that which the parks hadn't been able to necessarily address, though people individually were, but maybe not in an institutional way on the ground at each park, in part because there had been an emphasis on other things, right? That was part of the issues around transformation. And so we brainstormed and came up with a way in which Relevancy and History Project would focus on a really broad theme so that it could be later applicable to almost any park. And so we began to focus on migration and immigration to highlight what we called at the time hidden histories. And I put that in quotation marks because who is it hidden to, right? It may not be hidden to the people who experienced that past, but it might be hidden from the public interpretation, either what's visibly on site, right, that might live in the minds of particular interpreters, but that isn't necessarily always and ever more present, right, in terms of the publicly available after hours, non-tour based kinds of apparent histories. And so I use that in quotation marks for those multiple reasons. And Cal State Parks had a very successful project about highlighting hidden histories, probably something ongoing in different ways. And we also wanted to make sure that we were bringing people and place together so that those were connected, because oftentimes we either have place where it's about the natural history, or it's about the agricultural history in the case of citrus, or other ways, but we're not necessarily connecting it to the living and breathing people today, or those who might still be in living memory, or those who might be out of living memory and who we want to bring back in as the people who are connected to that land. And for Citrus Park, one of the most obvious ways to do that was by also bringing both the people who picked the citrus today, because part of the groves that represent the park are working groves and part are demonstration groves, right? So the fellow that you see represented here is among the people who were photographed as part of an art project that we began in 2017, and that is ongoing in a variety of ways. And it was conducted by a known photographer in San Bernardino named Tom McGovern, in partnership with Juan Delgado, who runs a variety of writing projects and has worked with Tom to collect poetry and oral histories that he then extrapolated from to create a series of poetry posts along the trails at the park, and also to literally reframe some of the interpretive stanchions at the park with this program of putting the people back in the groves, meaning the workers, alongside poetry that offered snapshots of some of the historical documents from Sunkist, notably that which was training immigrant workers through teaching them English, but the English they were teaching them was in fact how to cultivate and bud and pack and pick the citrus, right? And so that's one way that we really started. And we had recognized from the start that this would be iterative in some ways, that artists should be involved and that creative professionals should be involved, because oftentimes the work we do with students, which is primary to Relevancy and History Project across the board, isn't always ready for prime time, right? We may do it with them and it's great, and it's a great presentation at the end, but oftentimes we have to intervene in other ways to make it palpable for other audiences, and that we need some creative help in doing so. And so we focused on photography, film, and oral histories as among and audioscapes as among those tools for community story collection and interpretation. So this was really built on ideas that teaching, research, and collaboration really are multidimensional and reciprocal ways we might do research that we recognized as missing, right? So the park, that Cal Citrus was built on histories of a variety of people. It was begun that way, right? But we couldn't necessarily find those files at the State Library or in the collections of Cal Citrus. And so we began to look further and wider to bring some of the secondary sources, of which there are today a great more many than when we even started this project in 2017, into the interpretive process, and to also bring them to community members who might not keep up on the secondary source literature as well. And so through classes and internships at the park, and by bringing in Cal State, a couple of Cal State Fullerton classes, a couple of Cal State San Bernardino classes, classes, we started to divide the research to cover San Bernardino and Riverside in a variety of ways, and then to bring students in each of those classes to the park, to both tour the park and to brainstorm with us through a survey project with them and then with other stakeholders to find out what people wanted. And so we brought together different community groups to meet. As you can see here, they were mostly organized around groups that were invested in the region's history, especially from the perspective of those who had not made it into the traditional archives and other institutions. So for instance, Save Our Chinatown group had been working on preserving a place of of the first and second Chinatowns in Riverside, a community that was built upon citrus and on whose back citrus, on whose backs and whose knowledge the citrus industry was built, but that was common knowledge in some circles, but not across the board, or the African American Historical Society that actually was formed because they weren't represented in the earliest citrus festivals or blossom festivals in downtown Riverside. And so these were groups that came together to tell us what they wanted, and we were able to listen to that and also to take some amount of time, because we were doing everything all at once, to figure out what to do. And so we began to create programs with them, or co-create programs, including, the very popular and ongoing citrus tasting that the park had been on hiatus, was on hiatus again during COVID. And to try and use that as a way to bring some of these community partners together to do educational programming, fun programming at what we were calling, in that resumed iteration of the tastings that are very popular in February and March, that we began to call sweet and sour family festivals. And that term kind of stuck in different ways, as you'll see in a minute. And so what community partners and our surveys told us was that though we were planning on doing things that were in the groves, they really wanted something in the visitor center itself, where fourth graders, their own children, had been coming for years, to try and update it, to create relevancies and represent the people in the area, so that people would find themselves there. Okay, so we began to do this different programming, and that we realized that it required community collection, digitizing family collections, doing oral histories through our classes and through community collection days at local libraries, and to prioritize elders in the process of doing so. At each of the community functions, we had some means for people to leave little stories behind, as you see on my lower right here, about, that one person left behind about her tata, who had to, drop out of school as a child to work in the fields and groves. And then to also do little snippets of recordings. One of the important things we also put into the mix was to help our community partners when they were holding events. And so both at that time, pre-COVID, those who had been hired as relevancy and history specialists at the park, and then students and I and the creative professionals were able to go out to some community events. And what you're looking at in this image here is a picture of Lula Mae Clemens, an important civil rights leader and educator in the inland region, who had never had her oral history taken, and who was having a 100th birthday party sponsored by the Riverside African American History Association. And we joined their efforts. We helped them set up, we helped for photography and filming, and we did more oral histories as a result of it. And we've archived the oral history we have done, including oral histories that we also did with another elder. And I should add that both of these figures have passed away at this point. And so here you see one of our community collection day. We also started to partner with other groups. We recognized, after doing this oral history with Lula Mae Clemens, that as we reached out more in the community alongside University of Redlands students and faculty, in fact, we supported a community member who joined the oral history efforts that students would do. So there was a community representative sitting side by side with an oral historian, a student oral historian, going out. But what we recognized that we needed, and we had recognized this in the very first iterations of the project, where we had recognized that African Americans were not not represented in citrus stories. And so we started doing a lot of that research as among the very first things we did. Some of the partners like 1900 in Black and the African American Historical Society came together to do that research. And we began to continue it in association with the Bridges That Carried Us Over project. And that Bridges project we've decided that all of our collective work documenting African American history will all be stored there. So we've begun to actually make those partnerships real in terms of where people can find these materials, and to also conduct a lot of these new community collections together. So for instance, I'm going on Saturday to a community collection in Ontario that is sponsored by one of the supporters of these efforts, who's a member of the Black Student Union that was organized through San Bernardino. Now, the Black Student Union represents a lot of civil rights movement building in the area. So we're going to sit there with our computers to show people what we've collected, and with scanners in hand, so that and recorders in hand, so we can capture a little bit of those recollections of people who in the 1960s and 70s were community organization builders. And because of this impetus to recognize these bigger patterns, right, in the region that matter to people, to really enact the idea of relevancies. So yes, some of it connects directly to the park itself, right? Like pictures of people who played a role in budding citrus. In the sort of most well-known story of Eliza Tibbetts, who accepted these seedlings that were from Bahia, Brazil, through Washington, D.C., and cultivated them. Well, the story we never hear is about John Adams, who himself had been born enslaved. By the time he came to Riverside, he began to help, as he later reminisces with descendants. He called her Old Lady Tibbetts, right? He had the knowledge to bud those early seedlings. So we're starting to diversify those historical records that have, most, of course, prominently been about the white growers, the white settlers in the area. And we're starting to enrich those stories through these partnerships and collecting different materials. Now, we also recognize that there was a lot that was hiding in both the closet, literally the closet at Jim Newland's office and at CalCitrus. And so we took things out of the closet and digitized them. We were able to apply for additional, and this is where I say building iteratively, right? We were able to apply for additional support through California State Libraries and California Revealed, which has a program where you can get things digitized for free. You have to build the metadata for it yourself. Then you hand it all off to California Revealed, and they process it and upload it so that it's permanently available, both through California Revealed and then through the online archive of California. And then it ends up moving different places. And so we began to take both California State Park cassette tapes, and also we had relied upon citrus oral histories at the Smiley Library that were done by Inland Mexican Heritage. Now, Inland Mexican Heritage had all the audio files and had more oral histories than the Smiley. So we went into partnership with both of them in order to be able to digitize and then use some of those collection. So you see this Mecca Park migrant camp. We ended up getting some really great Spanish language oral histories, and then also more about braceros, as you can see here in this truck that was taking braceros to their work site. And so preserving these multiple, forms of obsolete materials emerged as really important. And during COVID shutdowns, we did a lot more of this work because it's super labor intensive to do it. All right. But luckily, a lot of it is now available on Calisphere and archive.org, as well as other sites by association, Online Archive, for instance. We also started mobilizing these archives through collaborations with other groups. And so, for instance, I have to admit, I put this here because this is like kind of top of my mind. because we did do a set of, and I'm going to come back to the park installations in a moment. I kind of built this PowerPoint with most recent first because I didn't want to lose the most recent in the face of concentrating on the deep past, because we started doing this in 2017. And so in 2019, we opened an exhibition with the help of the Relevancy and History Project with the Humanities Action Lab, which is an organization that brings 22 different localities together, including the Inland Empire, Los Angeles, and CSUN, in fact. I don't know if Jessica is here. And her colleague, Stevie Ruiz, is another partner. And we began to look at the ways land use is also about environmental justice. So when we think about citrus, we have to think about extraction from the land, both in terms of the ways in which Native people had their land extracted from, and white settlers took it from them in order to cultivate their own crops and to build in some of those stories that we thought really represented what we call the slow violence, right, of environmental justice, or the slow violence of the supply chain. Because one of the dominant ways where we recognized bridging past and present was by looking at today's encroachment on the land, removing citrus in order to not only have in the 1950s and 60s post-war housing tracts, but more importantly, in terms of the quality of life and environmental justice issues, the use of that formerly citrus land for warehouses. So this is one project where we focused on short documentary videos that we created for the park that span from citrus to logistics. So that's part of this exhibit, which will open in downtown LA at the Japanese American National Museum, where we've been able to tell a story about the inland region being very significant to the development of Manzanar through land that had been citrus and vineyards that became a supply depot that outfitted Manzanar concentration camp with all they needed in order to set up this instant city. So we sort of highlight these things, and it's built on Relevancy and History project partnerships. During the pandemic, we also began to build out some of those stories and put them on this website that's part of Climates of Inequality, which will be, as I mentioned, at Janum starting September 23rd, and then in Riverside at the Riverside Art Museum starting October 14th. I'd love to send out, information to this list, to mobilize, again, to draw connections to people we met when we had those family festivals who talked about the ways in which their parents had been pickers and packers. And today, the descendants are working in the warehouses. So we start to see a continuity of historically marginalized people living in historically underinvested in communities, which are the same as those citrus colonias who are working in the warehouses. So here you see a little shot from one of those short form videos we did. We also participated in trying to bring these stories visually into place at the park, and using a lot of signage to do so. So these are banners that were created for the 25th anniversary at the park. And I know Enrique is here, and Jose, who are getting ready for a 30th celebration at this point. But these were ways to bring, a sort of playful, tone, and to bring, some of the, living people to bear. On the left are pictures of the Venegas, Manuel and his father, and the Venegas family shared their stories about being pickers. And this is an image of them more recently. In the middle is a glimpse of one of the dancers who performed. And on the right are some student engagement efforts and family festival engagement, just playfully using and creating games from what you see here are smudge pots. We've also worked to try and display the meanings of those smudge pots and their environmental impacts. So among the fruits of our labors in terms of putting some of the work in the groves is to really take images like this that you see in the background, which features Asian American pickers in the Grove, and to do a series of exhibitions, mapping projects, archives, student essays, short films, and to bring, as I mentioned, collaborations together. So this is a still from a website that we developed and that launched in April, called Sweet and Sour Citrus. And it includes some of the micro documentaries I mentioned. One is called At the Sound of the Bells, to try and bridge the Native American past and issues of the land up to the Spanish fantasy past, as we call it, where images of bells, of course, populate our region. We have a diorama in the visitor center of Native Americans with a bell, and so we wanted to sort of interpret that from a Native American perspective and use stories of migration as part of that. So this short video does so. We wanted to highlight when we sent out, we had a kind of we were sending people out, like students and staff at the park, the relevancy and history staff, out to all of the local groups to give presentations. And every time we did that, former braceros rose their hand, or descendants. And so we made a short micro documentary about braceros in the industry, in the citrus industry, and also picking oranges and picking packages to highlight, this is marking the disappearance of the citrus groves among the last groves here as they make way for the warehouses there. We also importantly have created these other little engagement tools at the park. This is a stereo viewer that you can look through. And again, the goal there was to look across this vista, and maybe people will expect to have a close-up of that vista, but what they get instead is more like a 50s stereo viewer. And that's where we sort of put some of the images that will repopulate and just offer just a little bit to get people thinking about what's entailed in the labor process. And here what you're looking at is a little gesture towards the sulfur dusting of an orange orchard that we're comparing to the ways in which braceros, when they entered the country or their work sites, were fumigated. We have other slides that show the ways in which arsenic, a version of arsenic, wait, is it arsenic? One of the ingredients of the science part is written down, but I can't remember it. It was used early on to fumigate the groves. They would throw a big tent over things. And so we have some really amazing postcards showing that. And it used a form of arsenic that was later mass distributed for citrus and then utilized during the Vietnam War for Agent Orange. And so when we think about like these kinds of groves and the stories around them, we know a couple of things. We know that it's really important to talk about race and place. And also, if we're going to be inclusive, to also talk about queer space. We know that people want a permanent repository for the kinds of collections we've built, and that it takes a lot of collaboration and a lot more money to do it. And so we started applying for grants to support more permanent digital resources. And you might notice this recent work is related to the COVID years, right? Where we needed to move to much more digital kind of work so that our students would also be involved. And also that ultimately, if we're going to talk about more relevant, more inclusive histories for citrus, these are all things that related to the research we did, but now we're starting to put them into this permanent repository. And again, gathering the stories, connecting these digitized materials. This is a more recent collection day during the last stages of our most recent COVID wave, and that we need to connect it to archives that are present, and that we need to take this dominant idea that has really informed the in-person installations at the park, which was seeing yourself, right? To combat the symbolic annihilation that happens when women, when people of color, when working people do not see themselves represented, whether that be in archives, in history lessons, at the parks, right? And these are all images from the artwork that we started with. This is a picture of Elizabeth Carranzo, who's the fastest packer at the packing house that packs and sorts and ships the citrus from the park. We put her in one exhibition in the hallway of the visitor center. We put her picture up along with poetry by Juan Delgado. She didn't tell her family about it, but her nephew came as part of a school group, and he came and saw, right? He saw his aunt on the wall and later brought the family back. So he became the conduit to tell people. We then used this story to create an exhibition that I want to show you through the website itself, that we called Finding Ourselves in the Groves, Stories and Storytellers of Citrus in Inland Southern California. Here we brought the family members, extended multi-generational, of the John Adams family, the Adams sisters, to come and see the stories of African Americans now represented in the hallways. Here we can see another picker who narrates his stories of joining the service because the work in Citrus was so hard and he knew he wanted to get out of it. Right? And so we've put these on view, and now we've tried to make these available. We've recently partnered with the city of Riverside on a Riverside LGBTQ plus historic context statement, recognizing that members who are really significant to the formation of the Victoria Avenue, which is an avenue that was all lined with citrus groves and beautiful. One of the founding preservationists was a very out gay man who recently passed away, who's part of this story, right? So how do we really be inclusive? And then how do we partner with other groups and other artists into the future to continue this work, which we're doing with another project that intersects with the new and hopefully future-oriented Art in the Parks program that has been recently launched at the parks. And so these are some ways, along with trying to build some curriculum with the History Geography project that will localize stories for K-12 teachers. So we've collaborated with them to try and get some lesson plans that we can publish, to localize the narratives, to present to school teachers in the area, as folks at the park do on the ground tours, and also ports tours, those digital tours that reach, just in a couple of years, 1,000 students at a time. And to use the basics of K-12 teachers also in our university curriculum, right? To make things inquiry-based, to use the park itself, the images there, and the archives literacy-based, very intentional, connecting all of these, fostering hope and joy, right? Not to have all downers of stories of pain and suffering, of hard labor and nothing else, because those are untrue. They're not a multidimensional picture. And then to organize around action-driven, ways to move into the future in all of both the ways we bring students into these relevancy and history stories, and also utilize the archives. And we've had partners who've been able to do that with us. This is work that Michelle Lorimer has done at Cal State San Bernardino, to be able to work with her students who are student teachers, right? To create new learning outcomes using the collections that we've been building and using the park itself. They come to visit. Jose and the relevancy and history people and Enrique have toured these groups of students around, and then they go away and try and develop some of these themes. And then the rest of us later with an advisory committee go through those and try and make them ready for prime time so that other teachers can use them, because quite honestly, they're not at the professional status, right? They're student work. So for faculty who might be here, you may not want to invest in this way, but there are partners who might be able to help do that. And so again, this is some of what Michelle has done to employ local history of the park. All these are park materials to create, to work with pre-credential students. And I want to, okay, the reason I have this here, I'm not actually done, was because, let's see if this will work. I want to actually show you a couple of the websites that we've begun to use, and I'm not 100% convinced it will work. So bear with me. Are you looking at my screen going to Sweet and Sour Citrus, or are you on my PowerPoint?
The PowerPoint, yeah.
What?
PowerPoint so far.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm going to hope that I can, yes, there we go. Okay, I'm going to share now the PowerPoint, the website that I mentioned we started, that we made live. We've been working on it for a long time. We had a different version of it for a while. So now you should be looking at Sweet and Sour. Is that right? Okay, great. Okay, so we realized that one of the challenges of continuities and sustainabilities is to have a digital place to store things. Obviously, everyone during COVID was thinking this. We knew we needed, again, and I think everyone who's here from parks knows that it's really hard to be able to nimbly document and archive in an accessible way the fruits of your labor, right? And so that's what we started to do. And so what you'll see here, so we started it thinking this would be a way to be able to highlight relevancy in history. And we realized that we couldn't do everything everywhere, and that it would have to be regional and organized around those stories of sweet and sour and inclusivity, because every story has both sweet and sour. We know that. And so we started being able to post here, work around the exhibitions, for instance, that were installed, both in the groves. This one might not work quite right. Oh, no, it works now, because we did a Spanish language version. So sometimes we're noticing glitches that, the Spanish is popping up instead of the English, which just takes a little fix. And so these are, these just sort of help explain about some of the men who we met on the groves, what we installed at the park as small gestures or interventions on site, poetry posts that you see here, others that you see here that people just sort of stumble upon, right? And so we sort of have them collected here, which is not the same as just stumbling upon them as trail markers, but at least we do have some way to highlight those stories that are in hand. We also have a new installation that is for another of those wooden, and this is a purely signage based. It's all going to be on vinyl. We've had it ready for a while, but we haven't installed it yet. So we can continue to offer very cheap interventions, again, through some of the vinyl that can go on. We learned through the Tom and Juan project that that the photographs don't always fare very well. So we sort of had to redo everything in a year in. So we've begun to do that. The short films, as I mentioned, are all collected in one place. As you can see here, you could see, at the Sound of the Bells that I mentioned, these other issues, African Americans in citrus, which were among the ways we started here. We have a few educational resources. We haven't been able to finalize yet the lesson plans with the UCLA, but we have some that we've done, some that we were asked to participate in because people saw the digital stories here that are the right length. Citrus packing competition activity, the portraits, etc. And then the archives, as I mentioned, which we're trying to sort of cross-populate, so that, for instance, Casablanca is one of those colonias, those areas that really were built on the citrus industry and needs of labor. So we are linking to the archive I mentioned we created, which is here. We can visit that archive and cross-populate through here. And I'm going to shut up in a minute because we're getting on here in time. So this is the archive that I mentioned we began to work on, A People's History of the IE, and some of the collections. So you could see it all connected through Sweet and Sour. And this is how you could get to those collections in addition to seeing them at California Revealed. It's going to move really slowly while we're in here, so I might need to. You are looking at People's History now page, right? Okay, great. And let me just jump to another page here that might be easier to get to some things. So I showed you Sweet and Sour a little bit. Through Sweet and Sour, we can also get to some of the ways we've been, this is going to take a minute, some of the ways we've been getting to map the oral histories in partnership with University of Redlands and Cal State San Bernardino to create story maps that represent, for instance, Chinese labor, or this is related to a 1931 strike. These are story maps. We've employed thousands of hours of labor through multiple universities to map information in the oral histories and census data and put it on an ArcGIS map that is hosted by University of Redlands, while the archive is hosted by UCR. And so I'm not going to click, it's going to take too long, but you'll be able to connect to it through Sweet and Sour. We realized it was getting really hard to navigate. And so are you now looking at something that starts with experience history from the ground up? So we basically created an umbrella for a people's history. It cross-populates almost everything that's in Sweet and Sour, and it expands, because what we recognized as we branched out to in those first years, 3 years, we worked with partners who began to all do research in different locations. So all those San Bernardino schools did research to locate the collections in San Bernardino. Well, we wanted to put it all in one place. So the archives links to what I showed you already, that UCR portal. The maps links to that one I just showed you of story maps. The other folks links to other collections. So for instance, we link back to not only, the Bridges That Carried Us Over collection, which is in, and the Save Our Chinatown partner collection. And this we see as another way of building community engagement, right? All of this is about cross partnership. So the South Colton Oral History Project, lots of citrus laborers here. Loma Linda area was a citrus community, right? So now we've got these other collections that we've looked at, Bridges, that are all here as a way for other people to be able to see what's possible. We've sort of cross-populated some of those digital histories. Again, a way to try and just get more clicks, right? To get the Bracero story out there. So this is the most recent. It's not available yet. We're developing it right now. And the reason we've been able to do it is in part because we applied for additional funding, and that additional funding has allowed us to continue to work in a way that, again, as I mentioned, accords some of the principles that were from the starting point of this whole project, which were those about reciprocity, those about being non-extractive, right? Those about respect and humility, those about empowering local community members so that it wasn't a top-down delivery, especially when state institutions, right, California State Parks and the University of California were involved, right? So those are among the ways that we've had this iterative process that really has as its starting point. And I really want to highlight this because the Relevancy and History Project gave an institutional legitimacy to do this, right? That it wasn't just Joe Schmo reaching out, that there was an outlet. It wasn't like a dreamscape, like, well, we hope we'll one day do this, or students are going to do, a one-time thing. And that's, I think, really important, because I don't think any projects in public humanities today or in public participatory research or community engagement can survive just being about that one project, right? We don't have the resources. We won't be able to make it sustainable. We won't get enough buy-in. And so I feel like this notion from the start of the transformation team is one that's really important for really being able to, knit things together. And I could go on forever, but I've already taken so much time, way more than I intended. And I purposely tried to make my PowerPoint like a little shorter. I don't think I succeeded. So I'm going to stop there, and maybe I can be unpinned, so I'm off of the spotlight, and we can talk a little bit more. I'd love to, hear from you. I haven't paid credit to the other people at California State Park and Cal Citrus, as well as, those partners at, UC Santa Barbara, because I think we all have really learned from each other, and I hope we'll have a chance to continue to do that. Are there any questions, comments, discussion points? We're going to lose some people to classes, which is dandy.
I mean, I had one question I was wondering if you might be able to address. What has been some of the more challenging aspects of the work that you've been doing?
Yeah, and I think that all will agree on this part, because for the partnerships between universities and Cal State Parks, I think it's that we're working between bureaucracies, right? And so bureaucracies are oftentimes challenging, right? So the challenges are on the from one level of contracts, right, to then continuities and sustainabilities between them. How do we, and then I would add one more thing, and the continuities and sustainabilities are something, right? How, when staff come and go, can you maintain that, right? And I think for faculty, it's the same thing. Do you want this to be a lifetime thing? And, we have the same problem at the university. And so, one of the reasons we built this archive was to not be, and the Sweet and Sour site. And I know that people at Cal Parks have been very supportive, because the question is, why isn't it on the park site or the UC site, right? Why aren't we? And it's because there's no way to be nimble. It's impossible to be nimble, as far as I can tell. I won't speak for the state park, just what prior, and luckily they don't work there anymore, so I could say it, prior Relevancy and history employees have tried to do more using the websites at the parks, and it was just more challenging. And so what we're doing right now is building an archive through A People's History that is, for the moment, semi-autonomous, and that when the three people working on it, who are the same people who've been working on Relevancy and history, quite honestly, when we're ready to retire or no longer have interest or haven't been able to apply for additional grant funding and can't do it, we will find it a permanent home, either at California State Library or Cal State San Bernardino has expressed interest. And quite honestly, they're also more nimble in relationship to UCR. So that it's been strangely like much more nimble. The library there is like supporting us with so much. They've checked, like, everyone through state, Jim knows because he navigated it, checked all of the permissions forms and everything. But then for the archive portion, like, the librarians just did it. They just helped us make sure that we were doing stuff with, I don't know, I wasn't trained in archives, helped us make sure we were doing things that are, sound for the library. So I want to point to that. And I want to point to one more thing, because it was a goal from the very beginning. And there are so many of you in the park systems who have been trying so hard to work on this. I don't know how successful we've been in helping pave the pathways for jobs within parks for our students. Some headway for sure, right? But I do, and I do see that more, like, because, I really want my students to get employment. But there's one challenge, which a student who works in warehouses said. One was that he found it really hard to navigate the bureaucracy to get a job, even after meeting with the people who helped him to navigate that. Two was that the entry-level position he could get as a pathway to other things was not enough for him to continue to live in the area. And I hate to say it, but the third thing is that while maybe it was a job with greater cultural capital, though his job in warehouses was harder and temporary, meaning he didn't have security of employment, so was the starting point of seasonal work. And so he chose to stay in his warehouse job. And I just, I hope that we can, continue to forge ways to really get people in. Yeah, which I know is beyond any of us on this, any of us. It's beyond any of our control who are here. That's something across the board, right? In the humanities jobs, related jobs. So I'd say that's another sort of challenge if we want to think about, the challenges. And I'm just going to speak. I just would like to pass it back to maybe Enrique and you, Blythe, and Jose, about what are the challenges that you find, because I really have to respect that with very low amounts of staff, right? I've gotten to see what I would never see before, right? That there are very few staff who are in charge of huge properties with huge, burdens to maintain the safety of the public, right? And what is it called when you are at risk? Liabilities, right? That the burden is all of that, plus then turning on the lights, and doing tours and engaging community and, trying to get people in the door. So, I mean, relevancy on history on top of that, I know it's got to be just like another weight. So I'm kind of curious about whether, like, your perspectives, if I've characterized that right, and to add on to it, because you might not be able to say what I just said. I'm not really sure. So I figured I would say it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gudis. Yeah, it takes a team to run the park, and we're fortunate to have had a fluctuation of staff that are part of the daily operations. Now we have Jose Cabello on board. He's great. He runs the visitor center there. He's getting more involved in other parts. He's kind of the spearhead now of the interpretation effort here at California Citrus. He leads the volunteers, seasonal staff. So we're confident Jose can fill some great shoes there and keep moving forward. As you saw in the past, it's been sometimes myself and one or two other people, and we kept the ship going. But thankfully now we have Jose on board.
Thanks, Enrique. And Jose, when did you start? I know we talked about that at the last community meeting.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Enrique, for saying that. I started in April. So I'm, just shy of 6 months here at California Citrus. I'm not new to parks. I got my start up at North Coast Redwoods District, working at Prairie Creek Redwoods State Park. I originally grew up in Southern California, so I moved away to go to school, got a job in parks, decided to move back to Southern California to be closer to family. I think a lot of what you have mentioned, Kathy, is exactly how a lot of parks staff feel. Like, it is really challenging and it is difficult. It does require a person with the passion for this kind of work to make lemons into lemonade. And in the last 6 months, I have definitely learned a lot, from my former colleague Sam Alonso, who was really instrumental in helping you all with the Relevancy in History initiative here, and she's greatly missed. But with that, I think the work that you all are doing is really incredible. And when I first of all didn't even know the existence of California Citrus State Historic Park, even when I lived in Southern California prior to me moving away. And now that I'm here, I'm excited that I get to be a part of this project, whether that be helping with the initiative or just kind of my day-to-day operations as volunteer coordinator and just general other programs that I lead here. Yeah, just kind of excited to see what kind of comes of this initiative. From what I've seen so far, the work has been really incredible, and I'm happy um, that it has happened and excited to see where it's going to go.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm excited to try and work on what we've always had the goals to do. And Jose is on the ground working with teachers. And I think there's a lot of possibilities to sort of bring all of that together. There's some other efforts in Riverside that Samantha, who was who just recently left the relevancy and history position, started to work on with the city of Riverside new curriculum. And since there is so much new curriculum in ethnic studies, the park is a really good site to build into teachers' curriculum. Yeah. I'm kind of curious from the students in the room. I don't know if folks have just begun, but if you might, unless other people have, questions, if I can ask you to maybe share what you're working on.
Well, I know at CSUN we just started, so we haven't really done any onboarding yet, but I know that the project is going to be focusing on more of like the creation of the historic park in downtown LA because of like all of the protests going on for it to be created to begin with, which is really exciting.
That's really cool. And then the community groups that were part of it. Yeah, love that. That's really wonderful. Yes,
Yeah,
it was a great park there. I mean, that's a model for so much. Oh, hi, Stephanie. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're planning to be doing a lot of like oral history interviews. Dr. Kim had me and Natalie come in today because she was teaching during the Zoom meeting.
I'm so glad you're here. That's really great. Yeah, thanks, Natalie. Yeah, and Stephanie, I think in the very beginning, it was, you and Sean in combination with Jim that, really were behind the Relevancy and History Project, because you were doing such interesting things and doing so in nimble ways, again, which is I think, among the challenges for all of us. Are there any other questions? Well, I hope that
offer one thing to
I'm sorry,
Catherine.
Yeah.
Since I've also been in the position as a student potentially looking into park service work. Also, I should probably introduce myself. Ryan Forbes, interpreter 2 with the Bay Area District. We have a number of projects going on right now that are relevant to this. So this has been a fantastic input for me. But as someone who's been on the outside, a student looking to get in, I would open myself up if you have students or people with questions about navigating the bureaucracy. I'm always happy to make myself available. I don't want to speak for any of my coworkers, but we all know the difficulties that come with it, and I'm happy to be able to assist. And I know some of the folks you work with will also be familiar. I was actually very happy to see an old name that I recognized, Megan's sister, who was actually one of my first coworkers in state parks, working at Bodie State Historic Park.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, and I have to say that the only reason I was able to work with, Jim and Sean and Stephanie when we first were talking about what Relevancy and History Project could be was because she had been working there, and that she had worked at various points in San Diego, because otherwise I wouldn't have known enough, about, there's always a different knowledge about the park. So she was a really important person for getting, for helping navigate those waters at the start. Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm putting in the chat. Oh yeah, thank you. I would love that. And Ryan, thank you, because I did get last, I can't remember if it was winter or spring, I got a couple of names of other people, and I got worried about like sending students to just those folks. So I will definitely hold on to this. Yeah, thank you.
Always happy to help folks who are looking forward to park service work or looking into it. So try and be helpful if I can.
And I'm putting in the chat a couple of links to the pop-up exhibits that are, it's just one chapter in this exhibit that is from citrus to logistics, but it's a proud one part. And we are doing different projects that relate to environmental justice, which was one of the areas that we had identified as also significant for additional programming, and what teachers seem to be interested in, as well as students, for the park to address. And so we're hopeful that this, that this is another area of intervention, right? And I'm trying to give you the one for the Riverside locations, which isn't working, so I'll have to send that separately.
Well, maybe this looks like we're getting there. I could just I just want to say, it's very rewarding, considering that, Sean and I were sitting in a room up in the old headquarters building, which, by the way, is about 3/4 demolished now. And when someone raced down, they said, "What are we going to do to improve interpretation for this transformation effort?" And we said, "Well, why don't we partner with our colleagues at the universities to make sure we have the best of scholarship, and we're creating the new scholarship we need so that we can provide the most relevant and most accurate and most effective, cultural interpretation programs we could at the department." And we've been very lucky to have the partners at Santa Barbara and Riverside as our sort of pilots. And as you can see, the great work and all the wonderful dedicated folks. And yes, just so you all know, we're about to publicly release our big 5-year institutional strategic plan, which now I'm working in the strategic planning division from my old days as the regional historian at the Service Center, where I got to do like those dated 1998 exhibits that are in your visitor center there at Citrus. That's when we put those in. Or then finishing the restoration at Pio Pico, which we finished in 2002, which was my first major restoration project, or helping create, Los Angeles State Historic Park. So for personally, it's very rewarding to see these sites, it's starting to meet some of their inherent promise, and the ability of us to do it. And in that strategic plan, by the way, our number one goal in the department is recruiting and hiring staff. We recognize that's a huge, and there's some things that are out of the department's control even, but that we recognize that we need to improve that and make sure we get the opportunities to all these talented folks out there who want to, live the park's life, right? So know that that's part of it. The other sort of side part of all this, which was sort of the secondary, and as being one of the few guys with cultural resources interpretation background on the transformation team effort, was to really solidify interpretation education as the core program it is supposed to be in this department. And just to know that the ability to create the position now that Blythe has in stewarding this, these are huge, structural steps for us to rise up this program and make sure that we give it the weight and the support it needs. So from all those folks up at headquarters, there I'm now technically, even though I'm still in San Diego, luckily, but assigned to headquarters, we are, we recognize this, and the successes that you're having, even if you might think it's small or maybe you don't think it is showing. And I can guarantee you that the director and the commission, they're all aware of this and they're very supportive. And in fact, I know we're going to be taking our State Park Commission tour next week to Candlestick, which is also one of the pilot shots of Ryan there in Bay Area District. Lots of important things going on. So in the end, I hope everyone recognizes that all these efforts are worth it, and they do benefit, and the ability for us also to create a system to where it's available to the next person who comes along to stand on what's already been done. And as Kathy said, I used to have all these great project boxes of research and things sitting in my office because I didn't have a project and we didn't have any staff in the district to do anything with it. So as soon as we had those folks, I quickly shifted, and there were wonderful sets of oral histories and primary resource that could be used and turned into programming to make, the public have more opportunities for relevant and, enlightenment, and to share their side of the story, which is the other part, that interpretation now is. It isn't just us sending out to them, it's what they can bring back and engage, which then makes them that more invested in wanting to, you know, support the park and bring it forward. So this is all great stuff. And hopefully Blythe, we can hear from all our other partners, and because everybody has a little different, you know, folks at Santa Barbara have a little similar and also different things they've done. And I think it's just great to let everybody know out there that you don't have to necessarily have a fully dedicated staff. You can take on things, you know, and do improvements with the goal of eventually, hopefully we can get you some extra help and support down the line, but that this is really the foundation for moving things forward. So it was great when, was 8 years ago, when somebody ran down the hall and said, hey, you need to work on this.
Yeah.
Come up with an idea.
Oh, Stephanie, I'm sorry. I think I missed you.
Yeah.
I see your hand now.
Go for it.
No, it's okay. I put my hand up midway. I'm just curious because since we have the Cal Citrus folks here, well, first of all, thank you, Kathy, for the presentation. Really great work going on out there, and I'm excited to see our, you know, new colleagues from CSUN on the call too, and excited to dive into that project at Los Angeles State Historic Park. I think it's going to be really great. I'm just curious, like for the Cal Citrus folks, I've been curious about your Arts and Parks program. Like I know I had talked to Kathy and there was some art projects that were developed and proposed, and did you all get funding through the Arts and Parks program for that? Or have you put in for funding?
It's probably something that got tabled when we lost the interpreters and are now getting back to some of that stuff. I'm not sure if Jose might have something else, but that's kind of where it went.
The last I heard actually is we did get approved for a project that my former colleague Sam submitted. And it's with a local artist. I'm searching my emails really quickly.
Did you submit it with the proposal that I had gotten from Gerald Clark?
Yes, that one.
Korea artist who's gained a fair amount of recognition.
Yeah, to my understanding, it was approved, so at least from my email.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, cool.
Well, congrats. Yeah, at LA State Historic Park for the first round, we got some funding for a couple of festivals, and so, you know, hoping that, you know, it sounded like a good opportunity given that there were already some projects that had kind of been fleshed out a little bit. So good. I'll look forward to learning more about that.
Yeah, me too. That's great. Anything else? I'll hand it back over to Blythe.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, everyone, for spending the time this afternoon to talk about all that great work that's going on. And like I said, my intention is on a more regular basis, we get together, and I think October 14th, the Channel Coast District may be presenting that will be sent out to you all. And so we'll get a chance to talk about some of the work that they're doing there. And I'm just going to continue to go. So I'll be reaching out. And if you would like to share some of the work that you're doing, please let me know. I would love to help facilitate these conversations and just get our network of relevant and historical people together. So, and community engagement also. Yeah. So anyway, thank you all. This will be recorded and I will send it out in case there's anyone that would like to watch it. So, all right. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.